My name is Chris Rourke. This is the second in a series of short videos discussing CNET, the catecholaminergic neuron electron transport action selection hypothesis. In this video, I will review 9 predictions of unusual and unexpected physical phenomena that were made in 2018 by the CNET hypothesis, and evidence that was subsequently obtained or observed that is consistent with those predictions. Sir Frederick Hoyle was a famous astrophysicist who predicted that all of the elements on the Earth that are heavier than helium came from supernova explosions. Those predictions were subsequently proven, prompting Hoyle to remark that science is prediction, not explanation. While CNET itself has not yet been proven, evidence of 9 unusual and unexpected physical properties of neurons that were predicted by CNET has been subsequently identified or obtained. While that does not prove that CNET exists as hypothesized, it does support the need for additional work to investigate CNET. The first prediction to be tested was that it should be possible to detect electron tunneling in substantia nigra pars compacta, or SNC, tissue. Such tunneling had never been predicted before CNET or observed before these tests, which makes this evidence unusual and unexpected. That tissue is also predicted to have ferritin and neuromelanin in disordered arrays, which would provide a substrate for electron tunneling similar to a material called a quantum dot solid. Electron tunneling was detected using conductive atomic force microscopy, a special technique that can be used to detect electron tunneling in semiconductor devices. The evidence that was obtained also correlated to subsequently obtained evidence of ferritin outside of neuromelanin organelles, which will be discussed later. The second prediction to be tested was whether electrons could tunnel over long distances through disordered arrays of ferritin. This function would be needed for the CNET hypothesis to be correct, because otherwise the neurons would not be able to communicate as needed for the hypothesized action selection mechanism to work. Some initial test results that were published in 2019 provided evidence of this unusual and unexpected property of ferritin arrays, and additional tests performed by Professor Kai Shen of the Ningbo Institute for Materials Technology and Engineering confirmed those findings. Dr. Shen's tests also established that disordered ferritin will not conduct electrons over long distances at significant current levels, but will only do so if it is sufficiently ordered. The third prediction to be tested was whether disordered arrays of ferritin could perform a switching or routing function. Such switching or routing had never been predicted before CNET or observed before these tests. This function would be needed for the CNET hypothesis to be correct, because otherwise the electrons would flow in any direction they wanted to, like a conductor, and that would prevent the SNC neurons from firing properly. The test performed by Dr. Shen clearly showed switching associated with Coulomb blockade behavior, which has also been observed in quantum dots. A different type of quantum dot switching was explored in greater detail in the 2018 paper, but other types of switching, like the ones that were observed, were also contemplated as being possible. The fourth prediction to be observed was the presence of disordered ferritin arrays in SNC tissue. That structure would need to be present for the CNET hypothesis to work. While there was some evidence that suggested that such arrays were present in 2018, better evidence was obtained and published by other researchers in 2018 and 2021. In combination with other evidence, such as the conductive atomic force microscopy tests that were previously discussed, this new evidence makes it much more likely that such arrays are present, as predicted by the CNET hypothesis. The fifth prediction to be observed was action selection that is mediated by the large dopamine neurons. This function would be necessary for the CNET hypothesis to work. The earlier understanding was that such neurons are only modulatory and are not specific, but research published in 2021 by Professor Kaiser at Harvard Medical School refutes that assumption, consistent with the CNET hypothesis. Such action selection had never been predicted before CNET or observed before Professor Kaiser's work, which makes this evidence unusual and unexpected. The sixth prediction to be observed was concentrations of ferritin in the locus coeruleus, or LC, that were about the same as concentrations of ferritin in the SNC. Ferritin arrays in the LC would be necessary for the CNET hypothesis to work. Levels of iron in the SNC have been studied in more detail to try to understand Parkinson's disease, but there was less information about the LC. Part of the reason for that might be that the LC is much smaller and more irregularly shaped than the SNC. These results are consistent with the CNET hypothesis. The seventh prediction to be observed was chemi-excitation that can generate high-energy electrons. An energy source, like available high-energy electrons, would be needed for CNET to work. Professor Doug Brash at Yale found that high-energy electrons, known as triplet-state electrons, are generated by metabolism of dopamine into melanin. These results are also consistent with the CNET hypothesis. The eighth prediction to be observed was cognitive selectivity by the LC. This function would be needed for the CNET to work, much like action selection and action selectivity by the SNC. Task-specific modulation of distinct brain areas is different from a more widespread modulatory function that was previously proposed for noradrenaline release by the LC, which is consistent with the switching associated with cognitive processing that was predicted by the CNET hypothesis. The ninth prediction to be observed was membrane potential increase from postsynaptic activity, which would be needed for CNET to work. This observation was actually made by others prior to the publication of the CNET hypothesis, but because I am not a neuroscientist and I'm just a citizen scientist with no formal education in neuroscience, I was unaware of this information prior to the publication of the CNET hypothesis in 2018. Otherwise, I would have included it. So this is perhaps a prediction with an asterisk, but I also note that it was not understood that this postsynaptic activity at the SNC axons is what causes those neurons to fire. Thank you for watching this video. If you have questions or comments, feel free to contact me and I will respond. Additional videos will be prepared to address aspects of CNET that I could not cover in this short presentation.